You're too old to hold your own grandson. Welcome to her Fireside Stories, where the most thought-provoking tales come to light. Today, I'm sharing the story of a 67-year-old grandmother forbidden by her daughter-in-law from holding her newborn grandson. Too old, was their excuse. But they forgot one crucial detail. This woman held the entire family fortune in her hands. What happens when her last thread of patience finally snaps? How did a single call from her attorney bring the entire family to their knees? Begging for forgiveness? This is a story about the unexpected power of those who are often overlooked. About reclaiming your power and dignity when faced with injustice. Hit subscribe now so you never miss powerful stories like this one. Now, sit back, relax, and listen to this remarkable tale. I never thought I'd live to hear my own daughter-in-law sneer at me in front of the entire family and say, "You're too old to hold your own grandson." The sting of those words was worse than any insult a stranger could have thrown my way. Because this wasn't just anyone. This was Selena, the woman my son had chosen to share his life with, telling me that, at my age, I was a liability to my grandson's happiness. One moment, I was standing in the living room, anticipating the comforting weight of a baby in my arms. The next, I found myself so shocked that I couldn't even speak. My name is Harriet, and I have short, silver hair parted neatly to the side, once a point of pride that I kept for myself. A subtle reflection of the quiet dignity I always believed a mother of grown children should have. But in that instant, all I felt was powerless, small, and irrelevant. When Selena's icy remarks sliced through the atmosphere, nobody rose to my defense. Not Henry, my husband of over 30 years, with his thinning, slicked back hair that he kept so carefully in place. Not my daughter Claire, who wore her hair in a polished bob and hardly lifted her gaze from her phone. Not even my son Marcus, the father of that sweet baby boy, who'd inherited my sharp eyes but seemed to have lost his voice when he married Selena. The hush in the room was so loud that I could almost hear my heart pounding. And that's when something inside me snapped, a realization that for too long, I had let myself be treated like a relic, an afterthought, a woman whose best years were behind her. From that single, brutal moment, everything changed. The Harriet who'd placed everyone's needs before her own, silently tidying up and preparing meals, all the while being ignored, wasn't going to stand by any longer. It wasn't just about what Selena had said, it was about the way they all let her get away with it. This family had taken me for granted for years. But not anymore. I was done being invisible. Done being the silent caretaker whose contributions were overlooked. I had no idea how I would do it. But I vowed then and there, I would make them see me. And if none of them would step in to defend my worth, I would force their eyes open myself. In the days following Selena's humiliating decree, I drifted through my own house feeling like a stranger. At first, no one dared bring it up. It seemed easier for them to pretend it hadn't happened, as if ignoring the wound would make it vanish. In truth, they'd been ignoring me for a long time. This was just the final insult. I wandered past the living room, where Henry sat reading the newspaper, his eyes flickering with mild annoyance whenever I passed by as though my presence alone disturbed his peace. I watched Claire type furiously on her phone at the kitchen table, sending messages to people who apparently mattered more to her than her own mother did. Marcus was absent most of the time, either at work or running errands with Selena, and each day I saw him slip further and further from the boy I had raised into a distant man under his wife's command. One afternoon, I paused at the window, arms crossed over my chest. As I stared outside, across the street, Matteo, a 15-year-old with a buzz cut that always looked fresh, jogged up his driveway. He spotted me and waved, a bright smile on his face. Matteo lived with his mother, Lucia, who had curly hair pinned away from her face in a style both practical and warm, just like her. Lucia had raised him alone after losing her husband, and despite their hardships, they radiated kindness. Over the years, Matteo had done little chores for me, carrying groceries, mowing the lawn, changing hard-to-reach light bulbs. At first, I'd thanked him politely and offered him a few dollars, but he usually waved the money away. "You're like family, Miss Harriet," he'd say, And that simple phrase meant more to me than any of my own family's dismissive words. So, on that day, when Mateo came over asking if I needed anything from the store, I didn't just see a neighbor boy. I saw a flicker of genuine care. I invited him to sit for a moment on the porch. We chatted about school, how he was saving up for a used car, how he was worried about his mom working 2 jobs. And then he asked me how I was. The sincerity in his voice nearly made me break down. Someone actually wanted to know how I felt. Not for gossip or obligation, but because they cared. In a household where my own voice had been stifled, Mateo was like a beacon, guiding me back to a version of myself I'd lost. As the evening air cooled, I remembered a time, many years ago, when Henry and I were first married. He used to glance at me in a way that made me feel I was the only woman on earth, smoothing a gentle hand over my silver hair whenever the world became too loud. Now, that warmth was replaced by distance. When we spoke, our words felt rehearsed, more functional than caring. I found myself looking at the photo on our mantel, a much younger Henry, hair thick and full, standing beside me in my wedding dress. We had been so hopeful. Yet those days felt a lifetime away. I wondered if he noticed that I no longer greeted him at the door with a hot meal, or whether he even cared that I'd started taking my meals alone, leaving him to fend for himself in the kitchen. At dinner that night, Henry barely acknowledged my presence. Marcus and Selena were absent as usual, possibly out flaunting their picture-perfect family at some friend's gathering. Claire had locked herself in her old bedroom, complaining about the slow Wi-Fi. The house was quiet enough that I could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a sound I'd grown to hate over the years. Each tick felt like a taunt, one more second lost to a life of silent servitude. One more moment spent bending over backward for a family that refused to see me. Frustration grew with each passing minute. The more I observed them carrying on as though I didn't exist, the more determined I became to break the cycle. It wasn't just about me holding my grandson anymore. It was about regaining my dignity. That night, I crept upstairs to the attic to sift through dusty boxes, searching for something. Old memories, perhaps. A reminder that I once had passions, ambitions, and yes, even a backbone. I found photo albums of me traveling in my 20s, back before I became Harriet the housewife. I found diaries filled with dreams I'd abandoned. And as I flipped through pages of old scribbles, something inside me stirred. I was tired of being Harriet, the family's afterthought. It was time I became Harriet, the woman with a will of steel. All over again. When I emerged from the attic, clutching an old diary against my chest, I heard the front door open downstairs. I tiptoed to the banister and peered down to see Marcus stepping in, looking drained. His hair, once a youthful style that mirrored my own carefully parted locks, was now cut short in a neat, almost militaristic fashion, no doubt Selena's preference. He seemed weighed down, not just by physical fatigue, but by an invisible burden he carried on his shoulders. I had an urge to call out to him, to ask how he was, to remind him I was still here. But I didn't, because somewhere deep down, I realized he probably wouldn't stop to listen. I retreated to my bedroom, closed the door, and read through my old diary. Page after page, I rediscovered my younger self. I read about the day I first met Henry, how proud I was when Claire took her first steps, how excited I was to see Marcus off to college. My life had not been meaningless. I had poured my heart into this family, sacrificing my own dreams so they could thrive. And for years, that sacrifice felt worth it. But now, as I stared at the bleak truth, it made me question why I had let them overshadow my sense of self for so long. Later that night, as the house slept, I found myself writing once more. Not in a diary, but in a small notebook I kept locked away. I began planning. Tess's remark about me being too old might have been the final straw. But the resentment had been building over time. I jotted down how each family member had contributed, through negligence, passivity, or outright cruelty, to the point where I felt like a ghost in my own home. It wasn't just blame I was scribbling, it was a strategy. I mapped out how I would systematically reclaim my time, my space, and my respect. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of being vindictive. It was about regaining power in a place where I'd let it slip away. By the time dawn lightened the sky, I had a plan sketched out. Phase 1 was simple: detach and observe. Stop doing their laundry. Stop preparing their meals. Stop cleaning up their messes. Withdraw my support until they realized just how critical I'd been in keeping this household afloat. Morning arrived, and with it, the faint aroma of coffee. Typically, I'd wake first and brew a fresh pot for Henry and Marcus, ensuring they started their day with a hot cup before they left for work. But not today. Today, I took my time getting dressed. Smoothing out my short silver hair with meticulous care, I put on a crisp blouse I hadn't worn in years, something that made me feel confident. Then, I stepped downstairs and saw Henry rummaging through the pantry in a huff. "No coffee?" he asked, barely hiding his irritation. "I suppose not," I replied simply, heading toward the fridge to grab some juice. His eyes followed me, confusion evident on his face. But to my mild surprise, he didn't press the issue. Instead, he mumbled something about how he'd be late for work and left in a hurry. Marcus had already dashed off, leaving only the lingering scent of his cologne in the hallway. With the house to myself, I allowed a moment of satisfaction. My small defiance had gone unnoticed by Henry, at least outwardly, but I knew it registered somewhere deep in his routine-loving mind. I spent the rest of the morning tidying only the areas I used: my bedroom, the den where I sometimes read books. The rest of the house I left as it was: dishes piled in the sink, shoes scattered in the foyer, dirty laundry heaped in the hamper. Around midday, the doorbell rang. It was Matteo, sporting his freshly trimmed buzz cut and a friendly grin. "Need any help today, Miss Harriet?" he asked, holding up a set of gardening gloves. I smiled. "Actually, I was thinking of pruning those rose bushes. They've grown wild." Together, we strolled into the backyard. As we worked side by side, I felt a serenity that had been missing for too long. We chatted about small things: his classes, Lucia's second job, and how we both enjoyed the crisp fall weather. Yet each trivial detail reminded me that I mattered to someone, that I was seen and valued, at least by one kind heart. Matteo, in his unassuming way, was helping me rebuild what years of neglect had eroded. When we finished, I invited him inside for lemonade. As we sipped, he asked if I'd ever consider traveling again, or maybe taking a few painting classes. I realized he believed I still had the spark in me to live a full life, and that belief was contagious. It gave me hope. That evening, everything seemed a bit off to the rest of the family. No dinner on the table. No Harriet bustling around. Claire emerged from her room, hunger finally forcing her to interact. "Mom, what's for dinner?" she asked, brushing her sleek bob aside to glance at me expectantly. I shrugged. "Don't know. I made myself a salad earlier." She stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "Are you serious? You always cook dinner." "Well, not anymore," I said simply. "I'm taking a step back." The confusion on Claire's face turned to mild annoyance. But she said nothing. Perhaps she thought it was just a phase. She rummaged through the fridge, muttering under her breath, and managed to cobble together a sandwich. Later, Henry came home, looking utterly perplexed when he saw no sign of a prepared meal or a neat stack of fresh laundry. I didn't offer any explanation. This was part of my plan. After all, let them see what it felt like to actually live without the cushion of Harriet's constant labor. For the first time in years, I felt the power dynamics shifting. It was subtle, but it was there. I was no longer the background caretaker. That night, I allowed myself a small smile of satisfaction as I listened to them stumbling around the kitchen. Yet, as empowering as it felt, a tinge of sadness crept in too. Why did it take me withdrawing my support for them to even notice? Had I failed them as a mother? Or had they failed me as a family? The questions weighed on my mind as I prepared for bed. My reflection in the mirror showed tired eyes, but also a determination I'd never seen in myself before. Let them be confused. Let them question. It was time they learned the cost of ignoring someone who had once been their anchor. Subscribe to our channel to follow more riveting stories just like this one. Your support helps us bring you deeper insights. The next day, Selena decided to drop by unannounced. baby in tow. I had been tidying the den, dusting the shelves where I kept my beloved old novels, when I heard the door open. I turned to see her standing in the foyer, wearing a polished outfit and with her elaborate braids pinned up so perfectly it looked like she stepped out of a magazine. She wore her usual mask of politeness, the one that used to fool me into thinking she cared, but now I recognized it as yet another tool in her arsenal. She held my grandson, Owen, close to her chest, as if protecting him from some imaginary threat. I could almost see her scanning the room, evaluating whether I'd done something she could disapprove of. "Harriet," she said in a clipped tone. "I thought Marcus was here." "He's at work," I replied, continuing to dust. I didn't offer her a seat, nor did I rush forward to greet her and Owen as I once would have. An awkward pause followed. Owen started to fuss, and I instinctively reached out, wanting to comfort him. But just as I anticipated, Selena took a small step back. Her eyes flickered with that same disapproval I'd seen before. A silent reminder. "You're too old." He cries around old people. The memory of her original words stoked the embers of my resentment. Once, I would have tried to placate her, or swallow my hurt. Now, I simply let my hand fall to my side and held her gaze. She cleared her throat. "Well, I was hoping for a hot lunch. But I see you're busy." The patronizing tone was nearly laughable. Did she really believe I'd snapped to attention just because she'd walked in with the baby? "No lunch today," I responded, turning to put the duster away. "I've retired from cooking for grown adults." I noticed a flicker of confusion cross Selena's face, followed by a flash of something else, irritation. Perhaps fear. She was realizing she could no longer rely on me to be the silent caretaker. Good, I thought. Let her see what it's like to function without Harriet's unwavering support. Selena ended up ordering takeout, barely hiding her annoyance as she placed the order on her phone. Meanwhile, I busied myself by flipping through an old photo album in the den, occasionally glancing up to see how she managed. The tension was palpable. With each passing minute, Owen's fussiness grew, and Selena's attempts to calm him became more and more strained. At one point, she even asked, "Would you mind holding him for just a second?" But the moment I stood up, she seemed to remember her own condescending stance and quickly retracted. "Never mind, I've got it." I resumed my seat, flipping through pictures of a younger version of me cradling Claire as a newborn. Then Marcus as a toddler. It was a stark reminder of all the times I'd comforted my children without question or complaint. Now, Selena was actively preventing me from doing the same with Owen. The irony stung, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing that pain. If she wanted to be the only caretaker, then so be it. Eventually, her food arrived. She perched on the sofa, balancing the baby in one arm and the takeaway container in the other. I watched silently. In a previous life, just a few weeks ago, even, I might have rushed over to help her, prepared a tray, fussed over Owen. Now, I did nothing of the sort. And that's when I saw her composure crack. Just a little. She fumbled a piece of cutlery and nearly dropped a plastic fork. A small panic flashed in her eyes. And for once, I didn't rush to fix the situation. "You seem busy," I said calmly, closing the photo album. "If you need a hand, just let me know." She didn't respond. She simply collected her things and left, muttering something under her breath. Through the window, I watched her storm to the car, baby wailing in the backseat. A twinge of guilt tugged at me. After all, Owen was my grandson, and his cries cut through me like a knife. But I reminded myself, this was Selena's doing. Her choices had led here. If she wanted to keep me at arm's length, then she would learn the hard way what it felt like to handle everything alone. As I watched her drive away, a swirl of emotions churned inside me: anger, sadness, and even relief. For once, I wasn't the doormat, silently accepting blame or scurrying to meet someone else's demands. Despite the quiet ache I felt whenever I remembered that I wasn't allowed to hold my own grandson, there was a sense of empowerment in standing my ground. I took a breath and settled into my recliner in the living room. My gaze landed on the clock above the fireplace, and I recalled all the times that clock's ticking had symbolized my days sliding away. Unrecognized and underappreciated, but not anymore. I was taking those days back. One bold choice at a time. And a surprising ally in this new journey was Matteo. He called that evening to ask if I needed anything from the hardware store. Sounding genuinely concerned about a loose window shutter he'd spotted earlier. His kindness was a bright contrast to the tension in my home. We agreed he'd come by the next morning. So I went to bed early, feeling oddly satisfied despite the day's upheaval. That night, I dreamt of strolling through a lush garden, each blossom symbolizing a piece of myself I'd reclaimed, a voice, a desire, a dream. And in the dream, whenever someone tried to pluck a flower, the petals would glow brighter, resisting the hand that reached for them. In the morning, when Matteo arrived, he found me out on the porch, hair neatly pinned back, sipping my coffee as if I had not a care in the world. "Hey, Miss Harriet," he greeted with a wave. "Mind if I fix that shutter now?" He had his tool kit with him. I nodded appreciatively. While he worked, we chatted about the oddest things, his plans for college scholarships, my old travel memories, the best ways to care for rosebushes. At one point, he asked how things were at home, and I found myself opening up more than I intended. I told him about Selena's ban, about how I'd started refusing to be the family's invisible servant. Matteo, despite his youth, listened with an attentiveness that outshone my own children. His empathy warmed me, and I realized I was forging a bond with him that went beyond neighborly gestures. It was a reminder that genuine respect and kindness can come from the most unexpected places. As Matteo finished fixing the shutter, Henry's car pulled into the driveway. Henry stepped out, straightening his jacket and running a hand over his thinning hair, glancing at Matteo with mild suspicion. His gaze then shifted to me, as if silently questioning why a boy from the neighborhood was handling what should be his job, if he ever bothered to do it. But Henry said nothing. He strode inside, carrying a briefcase that signaled another late night of work to come. I couldn't help but wonder if Henry would ever acknowledge my new stance. Our marriage was built on routines, on my unwavering devotion, and on his assumption that home would always run smoothly without requiring much effort on his part. Now that I'd upended those routines, it was as if he didn't know how to speak to me. Gone were the days of me greeting him with a warm hug and a hot meal. Gone, too, were the affectionate glances that once reassured me I was more than just a housekeeper in his eyes. When Matteo left, I decided it was time to further my agenda. I would no longer shield the rest of the family from the consequences of my absence. They needed to see that Harriet wasn't a background fixture. I found Claire sitting on the living room couch, flipping through social media on her phone. Seizing the moment, I sat down beside her. "Claire," I said calmly, "I'm not cooking dinner tonight, so you'll have to figure something out." She blinked at me, momentarily disoriented. "That's fine, Mom," she said with a slight eye roll. "I'll order something." "All right," I replied. "And next week, I'm going away for a few days. Don't worry about me, I'll manage." Her head snapped up, bob brushing her chin. "You're going away? Where?" "Not sure yet. Maybe visit an old friend. Or just check into a bed and breakfast by the beach." I answered with a gentle smile. "But I think I need some time to myself." She opened her mouth as if to argue but closed it again. Confusion, maybe even a hint of fear, crossed her face. For the first time in years, I felt like an actual person in her eyes. Not just the mom figure, who was always there. Claire's bafflement lingered in the room long after I stood up and walked away. I retreated to my bedroom, the place I had come to see as my private sanctuary. Once inside, I allowed myself a moment to reflect. Going away was a big step, but I realized I had no reason to stay chained to this house 24/7. Perhaps a change of scenery would do me good. Remind me of the woman I used to be before I gave every last shred of myself to family demands. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A quick glance at the screen showed it was my longtime friend Anita. A free-spirited traveler who'd never settled into the suburban routine as I had. She'd called me occasionally, but I often cut our chats short. Too busy with chores or family obligations. Today, I answered eagerly, telling her about my plan to go away for a bit, to breathe new air and reclaim a piece of my identity. She was delighted, insisting I visit her at her lakeside cabin a few hours away. Come on up, Harriet, Anita said. We'll fish. We'll cook over a campfire. And maybe you'll remember what life feels like when it's not weighed down by others' expectations. The invitation made my heart flutter. This was exactly what I needed. I ventured downstairs to find the house deserted. Except for Henry, who'd locked himself in his study. Through the closed door, I could hear the low hum of him talking on the phone. Presumably about finances and work deadlines. A pang of sorrow rippled through me. How did we become strangers under the same roof? Yet, I reminded myself that bridging that gap wasn't solely my responsibility anymore. In the kitchen, I prepared a simple sandwich for lunch. My mind wandered to Selena's unrelenting attitude, Claire's confusion, and Marcus's silence. Even though the path ahead would be turbulent, I felt a growing conviction that I was doing the right thing. Not just for me, but for them as well. Because if they never saw what it was like to handle life's everyday burdens, how would they ever learn to value another person's contribution? Let them taste independence, I thought. Let them see that Harriet's not going to fill their plates anymore. That evening, I quietly packed a small suitcase, tucking in a few comfortable clothes, a favorite book, and a notebook for journaling. I left a simple note on the kitchen counter. I'll be back in a few days. There's food in the fridge if you need it. Harriet. I didn't detail where I was going. I didn't owe them that. This mini escape was mine alone. And I wasn't going to let guilt hold me back. When morning came, I loaded my bag into the trunk of my car and took a final look at the house. Memories flooded in. Happy holidays, birthdays, and small moments of laughter that once resonated through those walls. But now, the silence that lingered there was no longer my burden. Let the emptiness speak for itself, I thought. Let them wonder how it feels to come home to a place not quite in order. Without Harriet's steady presence, maybe they'd learn something, or maybe not. Regardless, I was done waiting for their validation. The drive to Anita's cabin was surprisingly soothing. The further I got from my house, the lighter I felt. I rolled down the windows, letting cool air tussle my neatly parted silver hair. There were glimpses of old forest roads, sleepy towns, and scenic overlooks. By the time I arrived at the cabin, I felt a decade younger. Anita greeted me with a bear hug, her loose ponytail swaying behind her as she laughed. About time you got here, woman. We spent the afternoon reminiscing about the glory days, back when we were adventurous, starry-eyed dreamers. Anita had never lost that spark. She didn't ask too many questions about my family's current state. Instead, she listened with empathy as I told her about Selena's cruelty, the sense of betrayal I felt, and how Mateo's kindness had reminded me there was still good in this world. She simply nodded and handed me a fishing rod. Gesturing to the lake. Let's catch dinner, she said, her eyes gleaming. Then we'll talk about how you're going to handle what comes next. Evening settled over the cabin, its warm glow reflecting on the still waters of the lake. Anita and I grilled our catch over a modest campfire, the sizzle and crackle a comforting soundtrack to our conversation. For the first time in what felt like ages, I spoke freely about my life without measuring my words. Without bracing for judgment, I told Anita about the moment Selena banned me from holding Owen and how it felt like a punch straight to my chest. Anita, skewering pieces of fish onto a plate, shook her head in disgust. Harriet, that's not just rude, it's cruel. She looked at me with genuine concern. How did your son let that slide? I shrugged, a bittersweet smile curving my lips. He's changed, Anita. Or maybe I never really knew him as an adult. Selena's influence is strong. She keeps him on a tight leash. And he's too busy or too blind to break free. I explained how I used to do everything for Marcus, cooking, cleaning, supporting him through college, only to realize that once he married Selena, my role in his life became secondary. That's not how family should be, Anita said firmly, her ponytail swaying in the firelight. But I guess you already know that. She handed me a plate, and we ate in companionable silence. Yet, my mind churned with possibilities. Would Marcus ever choose me over Selena? Could he see the manipulation? Or was I fighting a losing battle? Later, we lounged on the deck, sipping tea and listening to crickets chirping in the distance. The serene environment cleared my head. I've started taking my power back, I confessed. describing how I'd stopped cooking and cleaning, and how my newfound boundaries were causing ripples at home. Anita approved, but she offered a word of caution. Make sure you don't lose yourself in anger. It's easy to become bitter when you're finally standing up for yourself. We both stared out at the lake as it shimmered under a crescent moon. Anita's words stuck with me. Though I had every right to be angry, I also knew that anger alone wouldn't heal me or fix my family's dysfunction. This trip was about more than just revenge or teaching them a lesson. It was about rediscovering Harriet. The woman, not just Harriet, the wife and mother. Back at the house, while I fished under starlight and tasted a sense of freedom, unbeknownst to me, the seeds of my absence were beginning to sprout in the form of confusion and, more importantly, self-reflection among my family. Claire, as I learned later, had texted me multiple times with questions about groceries and laundry. I deliberately let her messages pile up unanswered, forcing her to adapt. Henry, meanwhile, had apparently stared at the empty dinner table in disbelief for 2 consecutive nights, resorting to takeout for both meals. But the biggest shift happened with Marcus and Selena. Without me around, Selena no longer had a convenient scapegoat for the baby's crying fits or the clutter piling up. She confronted Marcus about why I'd left, perhaps hoping he'd drag me back. Yet, Marcus, from what Claire told me, was uncharacteristically silent on the matter. A small spark of realization must have been burning within him. Harriet's not here to save the day anymore. My phone rang midday on my second day at the cabin. I recognized Marcus's number, but I let it ring through to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, I listened to the messages. His tone was strained, apologetic even. "Mom," he said, voice cracking, "we need you home. Owen won't stop crying, and Selena's stressed. Also, Dad and Claire are at each other's throats over who should buy groceries. Can you just call me back?" Once, I would have dropped everything to race home. But times had changed. I told Anita about the messages, and she smirked. "He needs you, does he?" Interesting how quickly the tide turns when you're not there to hold everything together. That evening, I carefully composed a text to Marcus. "I'm fine. I'm taking some time for myself. You're all adults, you'll manage." Hitting send felt like another small victory. A sign that Harriet was no longer the caretaker on call. My heart pounded with the thrill of refusing to be manipulated by guilt. Maybe, for once, they could handle their own problems. And if not, well, they'd just have to learn the hard way. On my last night at the cabin, I decided to take one final stroll by the water. Moonlight shimmered on the lake, turning its surface into a silver mirror. I closed my eyes, listening to the rustle of leaves in the breeze, letting the crisp air fill my lungs. In that stillness, fragments of my old self returned, snippets of the Harriet who loved painting, who once believed she could travel the world with just a backpack, who had a fierce sense of humor and a hunger for life. Then my thoughts circled back to Selena's words. "Too old to hold your own grandson." A year ago, maybe even a month ago, those words would have crushed me. Now, they ignited something else, resolve. I wouldn't just reclaim my voice, I would demand respect. And the best way to do that was to live in a manner that showed I wasn't about to fade into the background. At dawn, I hugged Anita goodbye. "Take care of yourself," she said, clasping my hands. "And remember, they need to earn your love now, not take it for granted." Those words rang in my ears as I drove back. Halfway home, I stopped for gas at a small station. While waiting, I gazed at the horizon, anticipating the confrontation that awaited me. A strange mix of dread and eagerness simmered in my chest. When I arrived, the house was not the tidy sanctuary I'd kept for decades. Dirty dishes cluttered the sink, and random items were strewn across the living room. It was strangely satisfying to see the chaos. Yes, I thought, stepping carefully over a pair of Claire's sneakers. Let them choke on their own mess. Henry was in the living room, tension lining his face. He looked up at me, relief flashing in his eyes. "You're back," he said quietly. Where have you been?" I gave him a calm smile. "Away," I answered simply, dragging my suitcase toward the stairs. "Taking some time for myself." He didn't argue, didn't demand details. He just sat there, as if waiting for me to restore order. But this time, I wasn't going to. Upstairs, I unpacked slowly, savoring the sense of control that came from deciding how and when I would rejoin the household. If they thought I was going to leap back into my old role, they were in for a rude awakening. That evening, I headed to the grocery store, but only for my own supplies. It was liberating to shop without the usual cart loaded with everyone else's favorite snacks or demands in mind. By the time I got home, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the front yard. I pulled in alongside Selena's car and spotted her pacing by the porch. Phone pressed to her ear. She glanced at me with a mix of frustration and desperation. Yes, I'll figure it out, she barked into the phone before hanging up. Without missing a beat, she turned to me. Harriet, we need to talk. I lifted my grocery bags, raising a brow. Oh, about what? She took a breath, braids trembling around her face. Marcus mentioned you were ignoring his calls. We're struggling here, and you just left. How could you do that? How could I do that? I echoed, calmly stepping past her to unlock the front door. You told me I was too old to hold my own grandson. You insisted I keep away from Owen for fear I'd upset him. Now, suddenly, my absence is a problem? Selena's cheeks turned pink. She glanced at the living room window, perhaps checking if anyone else was listening. That was a misunderstanding. I never meant you couldn't be around him at all. I cut her off with a steady gaze. You made it clear I was disposable. So I've decided to give you a taste of what it's like without me. Her eyes flickered, searching for a retort that didn't come. Instead, she moved aside, letting me enter. Inside, Henry and Marcus were in hushed conversation, while Claire sat on the couch, arms folded, looking thoroughly annoyed. They all turned as I entered, waiting for me to speak. But I said nothing, just set my groceries on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water, letting the silence speak louder than any scolding words I could have offered. Over the following days, the household functioned in an uneasy rhythm. Claire often left to hang out with friends or bury herself in some activity outside the home, returning late at night with a takeout bag in hand. Marcus, clearly torn between his loyalty to Selena and the guilt of neglecting me, shifted awkwardly every time we were in the same room. Henry vanished into his study or left early for work. And Selena? She teetered between trying to feign control and letting her frustration boil over. I dedicated my time to personal projects long overdue, gardening, reading, even dabbling in watercolor painting inspired by the scenic vistas I saw at Anita's cabin. It felt good to do things solely for my own enjoyment, unburdened by the pressure to keep the household afloat. Oddly enough, Matteo became a regular fixture. He'd drop by to chat or help with tasks I couldn't easily manage. We'd share stories, or I'd update him on how my liberation was progressing. He'd grin and say, "I'm proud of you, Miss Harriet," which warmed my heart more than any empty apology from my own family could. One afternoon, he mentioned that his mother, Lucia, with her pinned-up curls, had asked how I was doing. "She says you're welcome for dinner anytime," Matteo offered. "She knows you're going through a lot." His words made me realize how important real community and genuine connection were. Neighbors who cared enough to notice your struggles, imagine that. Meanwhile, inside my own home, I was still largely invisible. But that was about to change. Because the tension in the air was not only affecting me, it was seeping into every corner of my family's life. I overheard Henry snapping at Marcus over missed bills. I noticed Claire biting her nails when she realized no one had done the laundry, leaving her with no clean clothes for an important outing. And, most tellingly, I saw Selena rifling through financial statements with a look of barely contained panic. The cracks in her perfect facade were becoming visible not just to me, but to everyone. Something big was coming. I could feel it. The final unraveling of all the illusions that had kept this family trapped in a toxic cycle for too long. The collapse came one evening when Henry discovered Selena had been dipping into savings without his knowledge. I was in my bedroom, painting a sunset scene from memory, when raised voices echoed up the stairs. Carefully setting my brush aside, I stepped into the hallway. Marcus stood at the foot of the stairs, arms crossed, while Henry loomed over Selena in the living room. Claire lingered nearby, half hidden behind a doorway, eyes wide with curiosity and alarm. Henry waved a stack of papers that rattled like thunder in the tense silence. "How could you not tell me about these bills?" he demanded. Face reddening. "This is thousands of dollars in credit card debt. Selena, thousands. And you never once thought to mention it?" Selena snatched the papers from his hand. "I was handling it," she shot back, voice rising. "It's not my fault you've been so checked out that you didn't notice. Somebody has to manage this house. And Harriet certainly isn't doing it anymore." She pointed accusingly in my general direction. Though she couldn't see me yet, I felt a pang of both vindication and sorrow. Here it was. The moment I'd known would arrive. The perfect daughter-in-law. The paragon of a modern wife and mother. Had finally been exposed. It was about more than just finances. This was about her control slipping. About people seeing the real Selena behind the facade. Marcus cleared his throat, glancing at his wife. "Selena," he said softly, "is this true? We're really in that much debt?" She refused to meet his eye. "I said I'd handle it," she repeated, as if that statement alone could reverse thousands of dollars in charges. Her posture stiffened, and I recognized the same hostility she directed toward me. Except now it was turned on the entire family. If Harriet hadn't walked out on us, maybe we wouldn't be so behind. I needed help with Owen. With the household? Henry cut her off, voice trembling with anger. "Don't you dare blame Harriet. She's done more for this family than you ever have. And if you think we don't see how you've been shutting her out, you're mistaken. We let it slide for too long. And now look where it's gotten us." If this story resonates with you, remember to subscribe to our channel. Your engagement keeps us thriving and sharing more experiences. From my vantage point at the top of the stairs, I watched the emotional brawl unfolding below. Each accusation ricocheted around the room, intensifying the tension. Claire stepped forward, arms folded tightly. "I've seen it too," she admitted, her voice cracking. "Selena, you act like Mom is just replaceable. You keep Owen away from her, calling her old and useless. But she was the one who raised Marcus and me. She's the reason we even have a family to begin with." Selena flinched, eyes darting around as though seeking a lifeline. Marcus tried to place a comforting hand on her shoulder, but she shrugged him off. "Don't you turn on me," she hissed at him, voice quivering with betrayal. "I did all of this for us. For Owen's future. Your mother hasn't exactly been supportive. She left when we needed her most." Something inside me snapped. I descended the stairs, stepping into the living room. The entire family fell silent, eyes locked on me. I could almost hear the unspoken question. Would Harriet stand down or stand up? I took a breath, gaze shifting between Henry, Claire, Marcus, and finally resting on Selena. "I never left you all," I said, voice steadier than I expected. "I left a situation that was suffocating me. And Selena, you banned me from holding my own grandson. You mocked my age, acting as though I was a relic. Did you really think I'd keep giving and giving while being treated like nothing?" Henry exhaled sharply, as if relieved to hear me finally speak in plain terms. Selena opened her mouth, but for once, no words came. A flicker of anger passed over her features, quickly replaced by panic. She clutched the papers in her hand, as though they could shield her from reality. "Marcus," I said, turning to my son, "look me in the eyes and tell me you think this is okay. That it's right for your wife to push me away like that." He stared at the floor, guilt tearing at his features. "Mom," he mumbled, "I never wanted it to be like this. I didn't know how to fix it." "That's because you never had to, Marcus," I replied, my tone softening. "I fixed everything for you. And you let me. But not anymore." A silence followed, thick with regret and realizations. Claire swiped at her eyes, tears she tried to hide. Henry set down the stack of bills he had been clutching, running a hand over his slicked back hair in a gesture of defeat. Selena's posture slackened, her eyes darting nervously among us. "And Marcus?" He finally lifted his gaze to meet mine, looking every bit like the little boy who once scraped his knee and ran crying into my arms. Before anyone could speak, a sudden wail shattered the tension. "Owen." He was in his crib upstairs, the monitor shrieking from the coffee table. Selena rushed to grab it. But something in her face told me she felt cornered. She paused, seeming to debate whether she should let me comfort him or continue to block me from my own grandson. The entire room waited, breath held. Finally, Selena let out a trembling sigh. "Harriet, can you?" She stopped herself, eyes flicking away in shame. It wasn't an apology, but it was an admission of sorts. An opening. I didn't gloat, didn't say, "I told you so." Instead, I simply nodded and moved to the crib upstairs. My heart pounded with both longing and apprehension. The last time I reached for Owen, Selena had stepped in, accusing me of being too old. But now, that same woman was effectively asking me for help. I lifted Owen gently, rocking him in my arms. My short silver hair brushed against his tiny fists, and I felt tears prick my eyes. After so many months of distance, of watching him from afar, of hearing his cries and being told I couldn't soothe him, this moment felt surreal. Owen quieted almost instantly, nestling his head against my shoulder. Downstairs, the hush was deafening, as though everyone was holding their breath, realizing how small but monumental this shift really was. Stepping back into the living room, I found them all watching me. Selena's face was unreadable, but her eyes were moist. Marcus was blinking rapidly, overwhelmed by the sight of his mother holding his son. Henry, arms crossed, nodded at me, a silent gesture that said, "I see you," and Claire, wiping a tear from her cheek, managed a small smile. That was the moment I realized, this family was finally witnessing my worth. Yet, there was one final step to ensure they never forgot it again. As Owen's cries tapered to gentle coos, I continued rocking him, letting the poignant silence settle around us. It was as if years of unspoken resentments and overlooked contributions were being wiped clean by the child's soft whimpers. When I felt confident Owen was settled, I passed him carefully to Marcus. He held his son, looking utterly relieved but also ashamed. Selena cleared her throat, struggling to regain composure. I didn't realize how deep the bills had gotten. She began, but her words died under the weight of Henry's stern gaze. Then, to my astonishment, she added, "I'm sorry, to all of you, especially you, Harriet. I never meant for it to go this far." I studied her expression, searching for sincerity. There was a guardedness there, but also a spark of genuine regret. For the first time, Selena looked less like a manipulative puppet master and more like a cornered woman who'd lost her way trying to juggle an image she couldn't uphold. "I accept your apology," I said, voice calm. "But you need to understand, words aren't enough anymore. This has to change." Marcus nodded vigorously, still cradling Owen. "We'll change, Mom. I promise. We'll do better." But I wasn't naive enough to believe that a single promise could erase the scars. Change would take real work, on everyone's part. I took a seat, gesturing for everyone else to do the same. A wave of exhaustion hit me, but also a determination that kept me composed. "We need to talk about the future," I said, voice ringing with an authority I forgot I had. "About how this family functions, and about my will." That last word made them all look up, eyes widening with shock. "Your will?" Claire echoed, perplexed. "Are you talking about inheritance?" Henry's face paled, while Selena went rigid. Marcus stared at me as if he'd been blindsided. "Mom, I didn't realize." "That's exactly the problem," I interjected. "None of you realize. You all think I'm just here. Indefinite, and that my contributions are guaranteed. Well, they're not. I've decided to rewrite my will." The weight of that statement hung in the air. Once upon a time, I would have never dared to wield such leverage. But times had changed, and so had I. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Selena found her voice again. Quieter this time. "You're changing your will?" I nodded. "My estate, what little I have, will be divided according to who values me, respects me, and proves they can care for me in my later years, if and when I need it. I've worked with a lawyer to outline specific conditions." Henry looked startled. "When did you speak to a lawyer?" "In the weeks I was pulling away," I replied with a faint smile. I realized I needed legal documentation to protect myself. Because, let's face it, you were all content to let me fade into the background until I either gave up or passed away. I looked each of them in the eye. Well, I'm not passing away anytime soon. And I refuse to be invisible in my own home. Claire inhaled shakily. Mom, you don't need to do this. We'll be better. I promise. This isn't about punishing you. I continued, forcing my voice to remain calm. It's about ensuring my final years, and my legacy, are on my terms. If you genuinely change, if you genuinely respect me, then you'll have nothing to worry about. But if you continue to treat me like an afterthought, well, you won't benefit from my estate. Marcus was the first to break the resulting silence. I understand, Mom. I do. He still cradled Owen, who babbled quietly in his arms. We've taken you for granted. And we're sorry. Selena's gaze flickered nervously between Marcus and me. She looked ready to argue, to claim it was unfair or manipulative. But the debt papers on the table told a damning story. She finally whispered, I understand. I recognized a mix of emotions in that response. Maybe she felt humiliated or threatened by the thought of losing out on my financial support. Whatever her motives, I'd made my stance crystal clear. They now knew my boundaries were no longer idle words. To seal the moment, I rose and walked toward the hallway mirror. I caught a glimpse of my reflection, short, silver hair, eyes that had seen a world of hurt but still gleamed with determination. This was Harriet, the Harriet who had once been overshadowed but was now standing tall. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in our home shifted. It wasn't some instantaneous fairy tale transformation, but subtle changes were evident. Claire offered to do the grocery shopping and, despite a few fumbles, managed to fill the fridge with actual ingredients instead of junk. Henry, visibly shaken by the financial predicament, forced himself to confront the bills head-on, cutting unnecessary expenses and setting up a system where everyone contributed. Marcus and Selena were the most awkward. One afternoon, I caught Selena attempting to fold laundry, badly. The woman who once treated me like an outdated accessory now stood in my laundry room. Hair pinned up and sleeves rolled, trying to decipher which clothes needed gentle cycles. Our eyes met, and she froze. For a moment, I saw her pride warring with her desire to appear cooperative. She ended up giving me a tight-lipped nod before continuing. It wasn't a friendly gesture, but it was an acknowledgement that something had changed between us. I also noticed small acts of consideration. Marcus apologized if he came home late, making sure to quietly slip inside so as not to disturb me. Claire invited me for a walk one morning, calling it mother-daughter time, to catch up. Even Henry, reluctant as he was, asked me about my painting, as though remembering I was a person with interests beyond cooking and cleaning. One evening, as I settled in the den with a cup of tea, Selena approached me. She looked nervous, hugging her elbows as though afraid I might lash out. Harriet, she said softly, thank you for helping with Owen the other day. She paused, eyes flicking down. I realize I've been unfair. And I'm sorry. It was hardly a glowing transformation, but it was a start. I nodded, sipping my tea. I accept your apology, but I mean what I said about my will. I also mean it about wanting respect, not grudging obedience. She swallowed hard. I understand. Then, almost timidly, would you like to hold Owen tomorrow? Could use some help while I clean up the guest room. Was it a trap, a reluctant concession, or an olive branch? My instincts told me it was some combination of the three, but I found myself smiling anyway. Yes, Selena, I replied. I'd love to hold him. The next day, Selena gingerly handed Owen to me without a trace of her usual reluctance. His tiny arms flailed, and I gently cooed, guiding his soft cheek against my shoulder. In that moment, a wave of warmth spread through my chest. It wasn't just about being able to hold my grandson, it was the acknowledgement that I deserved to do so. My age didn't matter. My worth wasn't diminished by silver hair. I was Harriet, a grandmother with every right to cradle her grandchild. As I rocked Owen, I felt the household's energy shift around me. Claire wandered in, smiling at the sight. Marcus offered me a cup of tea, seemingly eager to please. Henry peeked from the doorway, a strange blend of remorse and relief in his eyes. And Selena? She busied herself making a list of chores, presumably to show she was now contributing to the household. It wasn't perfect harmony, But it was a turning point. They understood now that I wasn't too old to matter. That evening, I laid out fresh paint supplies and started working on a new piece, an image of a phoenix rising from its ashes. Symbolic, yes, but fitting. As my brush stroked the canvas, I felt the burdens of the past months begin to lift. I thought about Mateo's unwavering kindness, about Anita's lakeside cabin, about the confrontation that forced us all to face our truths. Most of all, I thought about my will, my leverage. Some might see it as manipulative, but it was necessary. I needed tangible proof that my boundaries mattered. Because the greatest victory wasn't them changing out of fear of losing an inheritance. It was them realizing I wasn't a second-class citizen in my own home. I was a pillar, a force, someone who had finally found the voice she'd lost. My daughter-in-law could ban me all she liked, but she would never take away my dignity again. With each brushstroke, I felt renewed. This was my story, and I had reclaimed the pen to finish it my way. Yes, the old Harriet was gone, and in her place stood someone stronger. So if anyone ever dared call me too old again, they'd soon learn just how powerful a grandmother can be, especially one with a will in hand. And there you have it, the incredible story of Harriet, a woman who showed her family that respect isn't earned by age, but by strength of character. Her quiet rebellion changed the dynamics in her home forever, reminding us all of the importance of standing up for ourselves, no matter how old we are. Did you agree with Harriet's decision to rewrite her will to make her family realize her value? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And let me know where you're listening from. I love hearing your stories. If you enjoyed today's tale, don't forget to subscribe to her Fireside Stories and click the notification bell, so you never miss out on the warmth of another unforgettable story. Until next time, stay cozy, stay inspired, and thank you so much for joining me by the fireside.